I never imagined I'd find myself sitting on my porch, sipping iced tea on a hot summer afternoon, only to have my peaceful neighborhood disrupted by a brigade of irate children and their overzealous mother. If someone told me that the biggest hassle of the summer would be a fake HOA police maneuver led by an overbearing Karen and her 3 unsuspecting kids, I probably would have laughed it off. But that's exactly what happened to me, Oscar, the last person they expected to mess with. The sun was shining brilliantly, and the cicadas were singing that achingly familiar summer tune. My friends and I had just wrapped up our weekly barbecue, and after helping to clean up, I sat on my porch to relax. With a glass of sweet iced tea in hand and a plate of leftovers beside me, I was ready for an uninterrupted afternoon. But, of course, that serenity was short-lived. Just as I was settling in, I noticed a small, raucous group marching up the sidewalk. It took me a moment to realize what was happening. A woman, dark sunglasses perched upon her nose, obnoxious sun hat perched jauntily atop her head, was leading her 3 kids, who were all wearing makeshift badges made from tin foil and paper. "Is that a toy police badge?" I muttered to myself, a mix of bewilderment and amusement washing over me. My amusement quickly morphed into confusion as they reached my property line. The woman, evidently the mom, shouted, "Stop right there! You're under arrest for HOA violations. Who does she think she is?" I stood up, blinking in disbelief, trying to gauge if this was some elaborate prank or if people had truly lost their grip on reality. "Excuse me," I replied, my voice laced with a mix of curiosity and caution. "I think there's been a misunderstanding." The woman, obviously in a fit of self-importance, puffed out her chest. "I'm Officer Karen from the Neighborhood Homeowners Association Police, and these are my deputies. You've been reported for violating noise ordinance during quiet hours. Now, lay down on the ground with your hands behind your back." I tilted my head, searching for some semblance of reason. I didn't realize the HOA had a police force. "Are you serious right now?" While I was trying to keep a level head, the kids were getting increasingly animated. The oldest, probably no more than 10, jumped up and down. "Yeah. You're in big trouble, mister." The second, a freckled girl with a ponytail, chimed in. "We saw you grillin' at like 3 in the afternoon." Superheroes in training, I thought. And that's when things began to go downhill. One of the younger kids, a small boy with chubby cheeks, decided it would be a great idea to mock my physical stature, pointing and laughing. The third child, a girl with frizzy hair, began searching her pockets for something, presumably a tool, to aid in my fake arrest. "Listen, just because you don't like grilled ribs doesn't mean you can just come here to play pretend police," I responded as I attempted to defuse the situation with humor. "Surely we can talk this out." "What's there to talk about?" Karen snapped, her sunglasses reflecting the sunlight. "You're a nuisance and a blight on this neighborhood. My kids deserve to enjoy peace." "We deserve peace." I held back a sigh. For all her aggressiveness, she clearly didn't know who she was dealing with. Sure, I'm a black man named Oscar, but what Karen didn't know was that I was the FBI director, a position I had earned through years of hard work and dedication, entirely focused on making my community a better place. I glanced around at the neighbors peeking through their windows, some clearly entertained, while others must have been shocked. Most people knew me. I made a point of getting involved in community activities. Yet here I was, being berated by a woman with a penchant for playing dress-up in her own little world. Looking back at Karen, I knew it was time to put an end to this charade. "You might want to check your facts before you make assumptions about someone, Karen," I said, my voice calm, but with the authority that comes from years of leadership. "Now, why don't we sit down and talk about what's really going on?" "Because you're going to jail," she interrupted, waving a finger at me dramatically. I could feel the stares of the bystanders creeping back in, mixing a cocktail of confusion and intrigue. "Then I guess it's time I give you some facts," I said. "I'm an FBI director. Not only do I represent the law, I've dedicated my life to justice. The eyes of the children widened as they processed what I had just said. The oldest boy half-heartedly dropped his make-believe badge, and I could see Karen's bravado begin to crumble. What do you mean?" Karen finally stammered, the confidence fading from her facade. In an attempt to plant seeds of doubt, I continued, "You'd best think this through. What kind of consequences do you think you'll face for playing officer in a way that's both illegal and frankly quite foolish? I have a few contacts in law enforcement. I could call in a few favors." Her bravado seemed to flutter like a flag in the wind, but Karen wasn't going to go down without a fight. "You're bluffing. I'll have you know that I have friends on the association board." Ironically, after citing the HOA board as a backup, it felt more pathetic than threatening. With her tiny, homemade squad of officers, her kids still caught in the absurdity of the situation, and her pedigree as a neighborhood busybody, I could feel this battle tipping in my favor. "Karen," I said, letting a hint of seriousness seep into my tone that typically commanded respect. "This isn't a game. You could really hurt your family's future and your reputation with what you're trying to do here. What do you think it'll say about you if this all escalates?" It felt like a battle of wills, the air heavy with tension. As the silence enveloped us, I could see the kids look up to their mom, wrestling with their own understanding of right and wrong. Before she could respond, a neighbor who had been watching the entire charade cautiously stepped out from behind a bush. Mrs. Kowalski, a sweet older woman who often delivered cookies to me during the holidays, added, "Karen, you should really listen to Oscar. He's one of the most respected people in town." She turned abruptly, glaring at Mrs. Kowalski and declaring, "Stay out of this, Edith." "Edith has a point," I chimed in, trying to keep the peace. "This isn't worth ruining your life or that of your children over some petty complaint. Just like you, I want a peaceful neighborhood, but going after people this way isn't how we achieve it." Karen's eyes darted around, panic settling in. For the first time, I could see doubt creep onto her face. It was then that one of her kids piped up, "Mommy, I thought we were going to be real cops." "Yeah," the middle child added, "now I really don't want to go to jail." In that instant, it was as if I could see the electricity in the air spark. She was losing control, and for once, the smile was wiped from Karen's face as she realized her authority was crumbling at the seams. The firework of tension had barely settled before I whipped out my phone and called the local police department, narrating the situation. The dispatcher assured me they would send an officer over. Karen's facade shattered, and I could almost hear the whiplash echo throughout the neighborhood. Before I could hang up, all hell broke loose as Karen suddenly lunged forward, desperately trying to snatch my phone. "You can't call the cops on me," she shrieked. But her kids, now alarmed and wanting nothing to do with this fiasco, tugged at her arms, pleading for her to stop. "Mom, let's just go home." Edith stepped forward. "Karen, I think you should do exactly what your kids are saying." As if on cue, the police sirens could be heard approaching in the distance. In what felt like slow motion, Karen spun, her expression slackening as panic gripped her. Instead of facing the music, she turned tail and ordered her kids to follow her. "Let's go. Now." But reality was not that easy. The police arrived just as the make-believe officers dashed away, and I explained the situation to the officers. They stood incredulous, glancing at one another while I laughingly said, "I guess I'm taking the role of crime detective today." The officers exchanged glances before one asked, "Did she attempt to arrest you?" I shrugged, trying to play it cool and shaking my head. "Well, sort of." With that, they nodded and went after her, though I wasn't certain if they would pursue any legal action. Being the boss waited for no one, and I was pretty sure it wouldn't be the last I heard from Karen. Several days later, I received a call from the HOA board. They wanted to address the incident directly. Turns out, Karen's faux pas had become the talk of the community. At an emergency meeting, they discussed the consequences of her actions. When I arrived, I couldn't help but notice the various reactions on people's faces. Disbelief, humor, and disbelief again. Karen stood at the front, slightly trembling. Her children sat at the back, looking tense but clearly feeling the fallout from their mother's antics. "You put our entire neighborhood in a situation we didn't need," one board member shouted. "Oscar is an important figure in our community, and you made a mockery of our organization." Across the room, Karen's face paled. She attempted to defend her actions, but it was met with uproarious laughter that echoed through the room. Another board member said plainly, "You don't get to abuse your power because you're upset about neighborhood noise." Finally, the board made their decision. Karen would be barred from holding any position within the HOA for a year, and she would have to attend anger management training. Furthermore, her children would be required to participate in community service to learn the value of cooperation. As the meeting adjourned, I couldn't help but feel a sense of vindication. Sometimes, people need to understand that their misguided actions can have real consequences, and that day Karen learned that lesson the hard way. Back at home, I took a deep breath, reflecting on the absurdity of it all. Sitting on my porch once again, I smiled as I recalled the funny chaos. In the end, it showed me the importance of standing up when foolishness happens. And who knows, maybe I could even bring a little more humor into my future interactions in this wild world. After all, maybe that was what this neighborhood needed: a little laughter and understanding about each other, regardless of the recent events. Just like always, life here would move on, but I'd continue to be a vigilant protector of peace and justice. After all, that is what being a director means, even beyond the job title. And who knew? Maybe the next time I'd be grilling ribs, I'd get my own little neighborhood watch to help me keep things amicable, just in case.